51-year-old Thelma Boyneville lived in the quiet North Shore neighborhood of Pupukea, Hawaii, in 2017. She was married to Kevin Emery. They had an 8-year-old daughter named Makana. Thelma was a teacher at a local elementary school. In order to make some extra money for her family, she cleaned units and a Hawaiian vacation rental. She enjoyed activities such as surfing, running, yoga, martial arts, and baking. On a Thursday, December 7, 2017, Thelma picked up Makana at Sunset Beach Elementary School and went to a nearby vacation rental house on Keiki Road, whose owners were clients of Thelma's cleaning business. Makana stayed in the Toyota Tacoma pickup truck watching movies while her mother went inside the double-story home to clean it. Shortly after entering the residence, Thelma walked in on a couple who was busy burglarizing the property. 23-year-old Stephen Brown and his 20-year-old girlfriend, Haley Danderand, got access to the house through an unlocked window. They asked Thelma to lay down, tied her hands, then they beat her with a baseball bat and strangled her as well. Brown then went out to Thelma's truck and told her daughter to get out and come with him. He callously told Makana that they ended her mother's life. Brown carried the girl to an upstairs room, followed by Danderand. They duct-taped her mouth and tied her to a bedpost. The couple left the scene in Thelma's truck. A short time later, a couple, tourists from Australia who were renting the home, walked inside and discovered Thelma's lifeless body. They heard movement inside and immediately left to call 911. The incident was reported around 3:20 p.m. Police responded to the call and discovered Thelma's lifeless body tied up and lying in a pool of her own blood. They also found a hammer, knife, and mallet next to the body. Makana was upstairs, uninjured and tied to the frame of a bed. Thelma's husband, Kevin Emery, learned what had happened when investigators informed him via a phone call. He was not allowed to enter the house. He then rushed to comfort his daughter in an ambulance at the scene. Thelma's daughter told police that a man with green hair came out of the residence and took her inside. A woman with pink hair helped him tie Makana to the bed. The case gained significant media attention after Garrett McNamara posted an emotional Facebook video. He is the twin brother of Kevin Emery, Thelma's husband. In the Facebook video, he said that he is offering $100,000 for any information leading to the suspect's apprehension. The 35-second clip went viral. "I have $100,000 cash right now for anybody who can tell me who just tied up and duct-taped my niece and caused her mother to lose her life at Keiki Beach at the North Shore of Oahu," McNamara said. $100,000 right now if you can tell me who just slayed my twin brother's girl. Makana also told her father about the appearances of the suspects while in the ambulance. Somehow, Kevin's twin brother Garrett found a photo of the couple and texted it to him. It's not clear where the photo came from, but Kevin posted the picture on Instagram with a promise of a $100,000 reward, and a civilian manhunt for the suspects ensued. Kevin also took the photo to the police still at the scene. "I told the police officer that these are the people who just took my wife's life," Kevin recalled. "I calmly asked Makana as she was shaking if I could show her an image to see if it's the couple she saw, and she immediately said yes as she pushed the phone away from her." Fortunately, Makana did not see her mother's body that day. Police officials issued an all-points bulletin for Thelma's truck. That evening, law enforcement arrested Brown and Danderand when the truck was spotted in a Walmart parking lot in Mililani Town Center. Surveillance footage from the Mililani Walmart store showed Danderand buying an untraceable mobile phone. She apparently still thought they would escape the crowd of police and civilians that waited for them outside. She paid for the mobile phone with Thelma's bank card. She had the card in the front pocket of her hoodie. When the stolen truck was found in Mililani, police said there were at least 75 civilians there looking for the suspects. 2. It had been 7 hours since the body of Thelma Boyneville was discovered when authorities arrested the couple suspected of taking her life. They spent the weekend in jail and appeared before a Honolulu County judge on Monday morning, December 11, 2017. Brown's bail was set at $1 million and Dan Duran's was set at $500,000. 23-year-old Stephen Brown was allegedly combative and uncooperative when he was detained, officials stated. He spontaneously uttered, "Just shoot me. I deserve this." 20-year-old Haley Danderand made a similar plea to police. Can you just pull your gun out and shoot me in the head? She asked. My life is over after today. The sad news had rocked the quiet North Shore neighborhood. Friends and family members were grieving the tragic loss of Thelma's life. At a vigil on Friday evening, December 8th, Thelma's friend, Virginia Herbert, was still in shock over the news. She did everything she could to be with people, Herbert told Honolulu News Now. She would celebrate life. Thelma's husband, Kevin, attended the vigil and announced he had already made peace with his wife's attacker. It is very hard for me to say this right now, but I forgive you, he said in a video. To the persons who did this, I know this is an act of evil. Love your friends, love your neighbors, love your families, he said. For unknown reasons, the case then stalled and was deemed cold by some. It appeared as if the couple might not be guilty, as was first assumed. Delays in the trial had led to public outcry and unrest. More than 5 years after the brutal slaying of Thelma in the Hawaiian vacation rental, the court case started in 2023. Stephen Brown and Haley Danderand were charged with taking Thelma's life in the second degree, as well as burglary in the first degree and kidnapping. Brown was the first of the 2 defendants to face a jury in Thelma's case. Haley Danderand is yet to go to trial. She has previously pled not guilty. During his trial, Brown, who took the stand in his own defense, had attempted to pin the blame on his girlfriend. The couple smoked marijuana before entering the house. I thought we were just going to hang out, Brown said. He accused Danderand, who was armed with a machete, of demanding Thelma to lie down so the pair could restrain her by tying her up. We asked her to lay down, Brown stated during his cross-examination. She was cooperative. Brown testified that he left to go surveil the property and claimed that when he came back to his girlfriend, she had fatally injured Thelma. He said that Thelma was unharmed and perfectly fine when he momentarily left the property. However, during closing statements, Deputy Prosecutor Scott Bell said Brown was the only defendant with the physical capacity to restrain Thelma. According to the medical examiner, Thelma Boyneville had wounds caused by a blunt object and sharp force injuries to her head and sustained 31 injuries to her body. His defense attorney, William Bagasol, questioned the state DNA expert. He held up a hammer, knife, machete, a meat tenderizer, and a bat to confirm none had evidence of Brown's DNA on it. Despite the fact that his DNA was not found on the objects, the 12-person jury deliberated for less than half a day and determined that 28-year-old Stephen Brown is guilty on all 4 counts. It was on Friday, January 20th, 2023, that Stephen Brown was found guilty of taking Thelma's life, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of burglary. Brown showed no emotion and stared straight ahead as the verdict was read by the judge. On January 24, 2023, a circuit court trial jury determined that it is necessary for Stephen Brown to be subjected to an extended sentence for the protection of the community. That verdict gave Judge Rowena Somerville the option of life without the possibility of parole. He was scheduled to be sentenced on May 10, 2023. It has not been made public yet what his sentence was. Haley Danderand's trial is set to begin in July 2023. She entered a not guilty plea to the charges against her. Patricia Joseph was a 56-year-old mother and cafe owner from Fort Jones, California in 2005. On July 15th of the same year, she went missing from her home. She left her duplex apartment without her glasses, contact lenses, purse, or cell phone. There were also several drops of blood found on her bed. Her body was found 3 days later in the Klamath River in California by a kayaker. She was only partially clothed. It was determined during her autopsy that someone had taken her life. She had suffered from blunt force trauma and had been strangled. 5 years later, in 2010, an arrest in the case was made. Philip William Frace was arrested after a witness came forward and made a statement that indicated that Frace was involved in Patricia's case. Frace was a marijuana grower from the Laytonville, California area. Patricia reportedly worked as a trimmer for Frace sometime before her life was taken. Frace, at the time, was in the Mendocino County Jail awaiting trial after being charged with taking the life of an employee. Stephen Richard Schmidt-Stephen was a 49-year-old transient who had been living in a motorhome on Bell Springs Road, Laytonville, California, where Frace resided as well. Stephen's body was found by a cadaver dog, where he was tied to a tree. Frace was eventually sentenced to 3 years in prison for that crime. In Patricia's case, Frace was released in 2012 by the Siskiyou County District Attorney without being charged due to a lack of evidence. Unfortunately, the detectives did not have any other leads to follow up on, so the case went cold. In 2021, the sheriff's office created a cold case and forensic evidence team to review Patricia's case and resubmit evidence to the Department of Justice for fresh analysis. The team prioritizes cold cases and reviews physical evidence using modern tools. Finally, on February 6, 2023, 75-year-old Philip William Frace was arrested again and charged with taking Patricia's life. The Siskiyou County Sheriff Jeremiah LaRue, who worked on the case, said that the analysis produced compelling results connecting Frace to Patricia's demise. The arrest is a result of the determination of our investigators and reflects our faithful commitment to pursuing justice for victims of violent crimes and their families. Our cold case team will continue to focus on these cases with dedication. I would like to commend everyone for their devotion to this investigation and thank the District Attorney's Office for their assistance. Our hearts are with Patricia's family, and we hope this arrest begins the path toward closure and healing. On a Facebook page dedicated to Patricia's memory, our family said that, "The time for justice is long overdue, and we miss you like crazy, Mom." Grace remains in custody on a $2 million bail, as well as an additional $15,000 bail for a failure to appear charge. Terry Turchak was a 35-year-old woman who lived in Denver, Colorado with her 3 young children in 1996. On October 5, 1996, in her apartment in the 1900 block of East 17th Avenue, Denver police and medical personnel found her body. She had been hit by a blunt object to her head. She had been strangled as well. Witnesses told investigators that they could hear there was a disturbance in her apartment the night that her life was taken. The detectives took DNA samples from her body, but they could not match it to a possible suspect. There were no witnesses and no real leads for investigators. The case subsequently went cold. In January 2023, 62-year-old Ricky Dawson was extradited to Denver after his DNA was matched to the DNA found at the crime scene in Terry's case. He was 35 years old when he took her life. Terry's brother James had this to say after the extradition: "We never forgot. We never gave up. It became very real when they tell you he is being extradited." Detectives with the Denver Police Department conducted a criminal background check for Dawson and found that he was arrested in Denver in August and September of 1996. Those records showed that he was in the Denver area around the time that Terry's life was taken. Dawson is currently in the Sewanee Correctional Facility. His DNA was matched to a Panama City, Florida case of 2001 on August 8, 2004. He has pleaded guilty to taking that person's life and assaulting them. Dawson's sentence in the 2001 Florida case included a 25-year prison term, which he was still serving when he was extradited. Dawson, through DNA evidence, is also suspected in an execution and assault case in Seattle in 2000. The victim's injuries and the manner in which her life was ended were similar to Terry's case. Seattle police continue to investigate if he is responsible for that crime, and their case has not yet been presented to the King County prosecuting attorney. In February 2023, Dawson appeared in court in Colorado for Terry's case, where he was charged with taking her life and assaulting her. Terry's brother James said, "They have enough evidence, I guess now, to charge him and hopefully make it stick and literally put him away for the rest of his life on paper. She was a great mom. Everything was for her kids," James remembered. He says time hasn't gotten easier through the years. Family goes on, it'll never get filled back up. There's a huge chunk that none of us will ever know how it ended up, said James. She would have enjoyed having grandchildren. So much lost, just a beautiful soul. He hopes his sister gets the justice she deserves soon. I know it's good to forgive. That's not me now. Maybe someday, but now no, said James. My hope would be that he would get the execution penalty, but I know that's not possible in Colorado, said Sarah Oakland, Terry's daughter. So I think we're all hoping that he rots in jail, and we wanted to let him know that we didn't forget. Cynthia Ruth Wood was a 33-year-old mother of 3 children staying in Bradenton, Florida in 1984. She worked as a manager at the Cape Vista Child Care Center, also in Bradenton. She was in the process of divorcing from her husband, Barry Wood, and was in a custody battle. She had 1 son from a previous marriage and 2 children with Barry. Cynthia was accusing Barry of physically abusing her and her son from the previous marriage. One day, when picking up her children from the Cape Vista Child Care Center, Donald Michael Santini, who came to pick up his girlfriend's children. Detectives believe now that this was all a plan to befriend her. On June 6, 1984, Santini contacted Cynthia and informed her that he has information on Barry that she can use against him in the custody case and asked her out on a date. The 2 of them met at her house where he would pick her up to go out on their date. She was seen by neighbors leaving her Manatee County apartment with Santini. That would be the last time Cynthia was seen alive. Then, 3 days later, on June 9, 1984, her body was found in a water-filled ditch in Riverview, Florida. The autopsy determined that she was strangled and Santini's fingerprints were found on her body. Investigators issued an arrest warrant for Santini. When they tried to locate him, they found that he was on the run. Santini's trouble with the law began 6 years earlier in 1978, when he was convicted of assaulting a woman while serving in the U.S. Army in Frankfurt, Germany, according to a 1985 Herald article. Upon returning to his home state of Texas, he was charged with aggravated robbery in connection to a convenience store robbery in 1983. He confessed, then he disappeared from the state just days later. A witness, Pamela Lynn Kincaid, came forward on June 15, 1984. This was 6 days after Cynthia's body was found in the ditch. She stated that she knew Charles Michael Stevens. This was an alias used by Santini. He confessed to her that he took Cynthia Wood's life. Santini befriended Pamela and moved in with her before meeting Cynthia. Her children attended a daycare center just a few blocks away called Cape Vista Child Care Center in Florida, where Cynthia worked as a manager. It was clear to investigators that Santini was responsible. His fingerprints were found on Cynthia's neck. They had witness statements from Pamela. There was also the link to the child care center. But frustratingly, investigators could not locate Santini. That was until 2023. In June 2023, almost 40 years later, a tip from the Florida Caribbean Regional Fugitive Task Force led U.S. Marshals to Campo in San Diego County, California, where they arrested 65-year-old Donald Michael Santini. He was known in Campo as Wellman Wells Simmons. He served on the Campo Lake Marina Community Planning Group, as well as president of the board of directors for the Lake Marina Views Mutual Water Company, a troubled water district where nitrate contamination has left district residents forced to drink bottled water for the past 3 years. Billy Joe Janin, chair of the planning group, told East County Magazine, "Everyone was surprised. There was nothing unusual about him." The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office said in a statement that, "We are aware of this arrest and have sent detectives to interview Santini while we await his extradition." At the time of his arrest in June 2023, he had 13 aliases, including Donald Chapman and John Tremblyan. During his extradition hearing, the judge had the following conversation with Santini. "Good morning, Mr. Santini," the judge said. "My understanding is that you are admitting you are Donald Santini. Is that correct?" After Santini answered in the affirmative, the judge sought to make sure, saying, "And you are the person that is wanted in the state of Florida. Is that correct?" Again, Santini said he was. On June 9, 2023, the anniversary of the day on which Cynthia's body was found and Santini's birthday, Santini agreed to be extradited from San Diego to Florida. He said he does not feel safe because of the victim's family, prompting the public defender to tell him to be quiet. Santini is currently being held without bail. Michael Running Jr., a deputy district attorney, said, "Regardless of whether the case just happened yesterday or, in this case, it's something that is 40 years old, we want to make sure that justice is achieved." Florida Gulf Coast University forensic professor Dr. David Thomas said the following. "Due to the nature of how Cynthia would lost her life, Santini likely left a lot of evidence behind for investigators to gather all those years ago. There is this thing called Locard's exchange, meaning that what is on me usually is left at that crime scene, so I'm going to leave some part of me there. So it may be in her clothes, it may be on some part of her body, but there's something that he left there at that scene, and they were able to collect it, so kudos to them, he said. And it is evidence that Dr. Thomas said, if stored correctly, can still be processed. Usually, the case is literally in a box that is stored in a room, and most likely that room, depending on if the room is temperature controlled, can probably last forever, he said. Dr. Thomas also said this break in a decades-old cold case is likely bringing a small sense of relief to the detectives who first worked it. It became very personal to them, because it is the victim and that investigator that are tied to the hip, and that investigator is tied to that family, he said. If Florida authorities failed to extradite Santini within 30 days, he would have another hearing on July 10th at 8:30 a.m. in the San Diego Central Courthouse. Her family was informed by the police department, but they have not yet released a statement after news of the arrest was made public. In late November 2010, the sudden disappearance of a young girl shook the tight-knit community of Brambati di Sopra. It's a small town on the outskirts of the Alps in northern Italy. The investigation that followed is widely considered one of the largest in Italian history. This is the story of Yara Gambarasio and a twisted tale that gripped a nation. 13-year-old Yara Gambarasio came from a large, loving family. She was one of 4 children, 2 parents, Fulvio and Mora. Her father worked as an architect and her mother as a teacher. Their respective families had lived in the area of Brembate di Sopra for generations. It was a quiet town with 8,000 residents, despite being only an hour from the fashion capital of the world, Milan. Life in Brambati di Sopra could not be more different. Time moved slowly there, and the scenery is quintessential rural Italy, with cypress-lined streets and views of distant mountains. It seemed like the ideal place to raise a family. On Friday, November 26, 2010, Yara said goodbye to her family and set off to the local gym where she trained for gymnastics. She left at 5:15 p.m. to walk the short couple hundred-meter route like she had done countless times before. Yara needed to drop off a stereo for her instructor, and then she would be right back home. When 2 hours had passed and Yara had still not returned, worry set in for her parents. Yara's mother, Mora, dialed her number, but the call went straight to voicemail. They waited until 7:30 p.m., hoping their daughter would walk through the door with an explanation of something that was keeping her busy until then. Unfortunately, she was still not home, and Yara's father, Fulvio, called the police. The call went through to Letitia Ruggieri, the magistrate on duty in the nearby city of Bergamo. The experienced magistrate wasted no time in getting authorities out and searching for the missing 13-year-old girl. When retracing her steps, the investigators found out that Yara made it to the gym that day where she saw her instructor. They had done a light training session in preparation for an upcoming competition before Yara left and started the journey back home. The last time anyone had contact with Yara was at 6:44 p.m. when she sent a text message to close friend Martina. She told Martina that they could meet up early the next weekend before the gymnastics meet. There were a few witnesses who claimed to have seen Yara talking to 2 men near a red car, but this could not be confirmed. They were not completely certain that it was, in fact, Yara. Tracker dogs were brought to the gym to try and trace Yara's route home. Instead, the dogs led their handlers in the opposite direction towards Mapello, a small commune located less than 10 minutes from Brambati di Sopra. Yara's phone records confirmed that her phone had been in Mapello at 6:49 that evening. As is standard procedure in missing persons cases, the family is always questioned by authorities. Each member of the Gambarasio family was thoroughly interviewed, which meant the investigators were able to rule them out as potential suspects. Mora and Fulvio were respected members of the community, and Yara was loved dearly by them and her 3 siblings. Letitia Ruggieri authorized wiretaps on hundreds of cell phones belonging to possible suspects and had her team try to track down the 15,000-odd devices that had passed through Map ILO on November 26. This led to the identification of their first suspect, a Moroccan man named Mohammed Fikri. A conversation had been overheard, where Fikri asked God for forgiveness and mentioned something about not being responsible for taking her life. At the time of Yara's disappearance, Fikri was working in Mapello on a building site. By the time investigators believed he may be linked to the case, he was already gone. Fikri had boarded a boat heading for Tangiers, a city in northwestern Morocco. The Italian authorities weren't going to give up that easily and set out to intercept the boat. The mission was successful and Fikri was arrested. His van was subsequently searched and, lo and behold, a mattress with dried red stains was discovered inside. It seemed like they could be on the right track to finding out what happened to Yara until further investigation revealed that the mattress was unrelated to the investigation, and that the supposed phrase heard over the wiretap had been mistranslated. Now, the investigation began to slow, as no obvious fresh suspects stood out to the authorities. The case had garnered national attention, with the mystery of Yara's disappearance being broadcast on countless Italian TV shows and reporters from across the country, filing into Brambati di Sopra. The Gambarasios knew the attention was good for Yara's case, but nonetheless found the intrusion during such a difficult time hard to bear. Over the next 3 months, the scores of investigators working on Yara's case tracked down every possible lead, checked every possible sighting, and interviewed any possible suspects. Mora and Fulvio were still holding on to the hope that their beautiful young daughter was alive somewhere and would be brought home to them. Tragically, that hope was crushed on February 26, 2011, 3 months after she was last seen. Lario Scotti had been flying his model airplane in a town 6 miles or 10 kilometers south of Brambati di Sopra. He chose an area away from any public spaces and over an expanse of scrubland to try out his new toy. Ilario was having some issues with the device, which led to him landing it in an overgrown section of shrubbery and weeds. He walked over to the site and waded through before reaching his plane. As Ilario stood back up, something caught his eye. It appeared there was some fabric on the ground. His first thought was that someone dumped some clothing there, but then Hilario saw a pair of shoes. Upon closer inspection, he discovered the remains of a person. While the person had clearly been left in that location for a long time, a few items of clothing stood out. A black jacket and a Hello Kitty sweatshirt, the same clothing items that Yara had last been seen wearing. Further analysis of the scene uncovered Yara's iPod and house keys. Her SIM card and phone battery was also found, but her cell phone was not. The autopsy was performed by Professor Cristina Cattaneo, one of Italy's most well-known forensic pathologists. Traces of lime were found in Yara's nose and airway, and rope fibers were found on her clothing. This suggested that the person responsible may be a builder or involved in the building trade. Yara's body had multiple marks sustained from a sharp object. The saddest finding of all was that she had lost her life due to exposure, not a direct result of her injuries. 2 DNA samples were recovered at the scene, one on Yara's gloves and the other on her phone battery. The samples were run against the national system, but neither person had been recorded before. All of the items were shipped off for further investigation, including Yara's clothing items. This is how a third DNA profile was discovered 2 months later on Yara's underwear. Authorities believed there had been a struggle and the perpetrator had injured himself, hence the DNA being left behind. The suspect was named Ignoto 1, meaning unknown one. Now they just needed to find who this DNA belonged to. The investigators ordered DNA samples to be collected from everyone close to Yara. That included family members, friends, and locals who frequented areas that Yara had. Other officers were in charge of cross-referencing phone records of devices that had moved through Brambati di Sopra, and the town where Yara's body was discovered. When a number was found, the owner was tracked down and asked to provide their DNA. This was not glamorous police work. It took hundreds upon hundreds of hours looking through data and trying to put faces to these numbers. Each new sample took a few hours to analyze and get a profile from, with multiple geneticists from across Italy working overtime together. Them logged. The search for Yara and the subsequent search to track down the perpetrator has gone down as one of the largest and most expensive manhunts in Italy's history. Yara was finally laid to rest at the end of May 2011. In the months following the discovery of her body, thousands of DNA samples had been analyzed, but still, there had not been a hit against unknown one. Letizia Ruggieri decided to look at another angle. She knew that many perpetrators tend to dispose of their victims in areas that they are comfortable in or familiar with. Where Yara's body was found, there was a nightclub not far away. She knew it was a long shot, but Letizia ordered officers to take DNA samples from club patrons outside. On busy Friday and Saturday nights, this is how Damiano Gerinon entered the picture. Damiano frequently attended the nightclub, and his DNA sample bared a striking resemblance to unknown one, but he had a rock-solid alibi since he was in South America during the time that Yara was last seen. Still, the authorities weren't giving up on this lead. And geneticists were convinced that unknown one was a relative of Damiano Gerinoni. Every member of the Gerinoni family was looked into, and a shocking link to the Gambriaceos was discovered. Damiano's mother, Aurora, had worked for the family as a domestic helper for 10 whole years. Aurora lived near to Yara's home and came over twice a week when she was growing up. Yara and Aurora were close. Aurora always made sure to keep an eye out for Yara, seeing that she did not get up to nonsense, and Yara loved to show off her new gymnastics moves to Aurora. Even though she stopped working for Fulvio and Mora, Aurora maintained a good relationship with the family. So imagine her shock when she found herself at the center of the investigation. "It was the worst thing that could happen to me," Aurora later confessed. Both Aurora and her son, Damiano, were extensively questioned. The pair's phone calls were monitored, and they were followed. After months of trying to find any connection between either of them and what happened to Yara, Letizia admitted resigning herself to the fact that, in the end, this was nothing more than a sick coincidence. At the one-year anniversary of Yara losing her life, the pressure on authorities to bring the person responsible to justice was reaching a breaking point. Various politicians were making digs at Letizia, questioning her competence as magistrate, despite her running a textbook investigation from the get-go. But she could not let this background noise distract her from solving Yara's case. So she doubled down on the only viable lead so far, Damiano's DNA profile. They focused on building an extensive family tree of those around Damiano, which resulted in hundreds of names being cataloged. Relatives as far back as 1815 were recorded until an immense family tree lay before them. This led investigators to the sleepy village of Gorno, where the same families have lived for generations, including the Guerin ones. Damiano's uncle Giuseppe passed away in 1999. Investigators hoped they could somehow obtain a DNA sample from him, so they visited his widow, Laura, in September 2011. As luck would have it, she was able to provide 2 stamps that her late husband had licked. The results showed that unknown one was likely Giuseppe's son, making him Damiano's first cousin. Giuseppe worked as a bus driver and was a talented accordion player, putting his talent to use at Gorno festivals. He had 3 children with Laura, 2 sons and a daughter. When their DNA was compared to unknown one, neither came back as a perfect match, since neither of them had children. The next logical explanation was that Giuseppe had another son out there that they did not know about, one that he did not have with Laura. Letizia described this as an investigation within an investigation. So how on earth would they track down Giuseppe's illegitimate son? Through their deep dive into Giuseppe's personal life, investigators found out that he visited a resort called Solace Term every May from the early 1960s. It was an annual tradition for him. These trips were made without his wife, Laura. The spring months of 2012 were spent looking through Solace Term's records, tracking down women whose time at the resort overlapped Giuseppe's. The effort proved fruitless, as did searching through orphanage records and women's shelters. They came to the conclusion that the possible woman they were searching for was most likely married. Divorce in Italy had been illegal until 1970, so even if the mystery woman had an affair with Giuseppe, she likely stayed married. During this time, Yara's parents had hired a freelance geneticist, Giorgio Portera, to look over the investigation and explain to them, in layman's terms, what everything meant. After reviewing the information, Giorgio campaigned for Giuseppe's body to be exhumed so a proper DNA analysis could be performed. The DNA taken from the stamp could only compare part of unknown one's DNA sequence. His wish was granted on March 7, 2013, when Giuseppe's body was exhumed. This effort confirmed that, without a shadow of a doubt, Giuseppe was unknown one's father. He did have a son out there who was responsible for Yara's passing. The authorities kept details of the information private for the most part, much to the frustration of the media desperate for a story. Slowly, rumors started to spread about Giuseppe's illegitimate son, who was believed to have taken Yara's life. As an array of journalists started their own investigation, many affairs and family secrets were uncovered. Things began playing out like a soap opera in the small towns, but a breakthrough was on the horizon. Marshal Giovanni Maccarino worked closely with Letizia. He worked in an office alongside her own. Marshal was a well-liked man with a stubborn streak by his own admittance. Yara's case had caused him many sleepless nights and 4 years with no breaks, working towards bringing the man responsible to justice. In stark contrast to the high-tech work that went into analyzing the DNA samples and tracking phone records, Marshal was more old school. He liked getting out into the community and talking to people, making them feel comfortable by talking face to face. Through this, Marshal found out many details of Giuseppe's life. As previously mentioned, Giuseppe worked as a bus driver, and Marshal managed to track down his old colleagues. The main bus route for the drivers was taking factory workers to the abundant textile factories in the area. Many of these passengers were women. The drivers often described Giuseppe as somewhat of a ladies' man. While Marshal became acquainted with every aspect of Giuseppe's life, a name came up: Esther Asrufi. Esther was born and raised in Ponte Selva, where Giuseppe lived since the early 1960s. Giuseppe actually lived not far from Esther at the time. When she was 19 years old, Esther got married and moved to a nearby village. She worked at a textile mill and would take the bus daily to her job. This is how Esther met Giuseppe. Her husband was a sickly man who used a cane, and during her frequent trips in Giuseppe's bus, Esther fell in love. Did investigators finally have their missing link? Letizia and her team checked their database to see if Esther happened to be on file. They found that a sample had been taken from Esther back in 2012, but a lab error meant it was not showing on the system. The result was conclusive when the moment came to run Esther's DNA against Unknown One. Unknown One was Esther's son. Had her sample been correctly logged in the first place, this very well may have come to light 2 years earlier. Esther left the home with her husband and they moved back to Ponte Selva in 1970. The couple welcomed twins that same year, a boy and a girl. The little boy was named Massimo. In 2014, Massimo Bassetti was 44 years old and married with children. The family lived together in Mapello, the same town where Yara's cell phone had last pinged. Now that Letizia had a name, she wasted no time in tracking down Bassetti and collecting a DNA sample from him to compare it against Unknown One. This would be the final puzzle piece if it confirmed that his DNA was found on Yara's body. They knew asking Bassetti directly for a sample would raise suspicion, so they came up with a clever plan, but first they needed to find him. Bassetti was observed for a few days where the team learned he had a fairly set routine. He worked in construction and returned home each evening at the same time in his small truck. Bassetti seemed like any other family man. After establishing his routine and confirming what car he drove, the plan was set into action. While Bassetti was out driving, an officer pulled him over and explained they were breathalyzing drivers to catch people driving over the legal limit. Bassetti was asked to blow into the device. His initial response was a chuckle followed by, "I do not drink." The officer persisted and got Bassetti to complete the test. The officer then looked down at his breathalyzer and explained to Bassetti that it seemed to be faulty before asking him to blow into a second device. It showed that Bassetti had not been drinking that day, so he was free to go. As he drove off, the officer jogged back to his car, armed with 2 quality DNA samples from their prime suspect. They were sent off to the lab immediately and ran as they arrived. By early afternoon, authorities had their answer. Massimo Bassetti was Unknown One. On June 16, 2014, Bassetti was pounced on by police and taken into custody, where he was charged with taking the life of Yara Gambarasio. During their investigation into Bassetti, investigators found that he frequented areas near where Yara lived. He often ate at a pizzeria down the road and would park his car behind the gym where Yara practiced her gymnastics. He also got regular suntans from a local shop. His internet search history showed a twisted desire for teenage girls. and his phone records showed he was in Brambati di Sopra when Yara disappeared. Bassetti intentionally turned his phone off at 5:45 p.m., only turning it back on the following morning. When he was questioned, Bassetti remained silent and claimed he was not guilty. His legal team decided to call the DNA evidence into question, saying that while it may prove he had contact with Yara, it did not prove he was responsible for her slaying. The trial began in mid-2015 and lasted an entire year. It revealed the sheer extent of the investigation, where over 18,000 DNA samples had been analyzed. After multiple witnesses took the stand and dozens of pieces of evidence presented, it was time for a ruling. The court of Bergamo, overseen by Judge Antonella Pertoja, found him guilty on July 1, 2016. Bassetti was given a life sentence. Yara's case is unique for many reasons. Not only was her loss felt by her family, but the investigation into finding the monster who took her away from them upended multiple other families. Giuseppe's widow now had to come to terms with the fact that her husband had been unfaithful and that his son was the man responsible for this deplorable crime. Bassetti's mother and sister also have to live with what he had done, along with many other scandals that were uncovered along the way. It, of course, goes without saying that the loss of the bright young girl that was Yara Gambarejo is by far the hardest to swallow. We still do not know exactly what happened that night, as Bassetti still maintains his innocence. Maybe one day the truth will come to light. In June 2020, the remains of an unidentified female were found in the Union County, New Jersey city of Elizabeth. The unknown woman's body was located along railroad tracks in the area of the 300 block of Port Avenue. Investigators responded to the scene and transported the woman's body so that an autopsy could be performed. During the autopsy, it was determined that someone had taken the woman's life. It was also determined that the woman was black and likely between the ages of 25 and 35 at the time her life was ended. She stood approximately 5 foot 6 inches tall and weighed 125 to 140 pounds. The woman had short hair and double piercings in both ears. A forensic sketch depicting what the woman may have looked like was created and shared widely with the public in hopes that someone might recognize her. However, with few leads to work with, investigators were unable to determine the identity of the woman despite exhaustive efforts. Since investigators were unable to identify her, she became known as the Union County Jane Doe 2020. Details of the woman's unidentified person case were entered into the National and Unidentified Missing Persons System. In March 2023, 3 years after the discovery of the woman's remains, the Union County Prosecutor's Office partnered with Othram Incorporated to determine if advanced DNA testing could help provide an identity for the woman or a close relative. The Union County Prosecutor's Office Forensic Laboratory submitted forensic evidence to Othram's laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas. Othram scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the woman. Othram's in-house genetic genealogy team used the DNA profile in a genealogical search to provide investigative leads that were returned to investigators. Using these leads, detectives were able to narrow down the search and identify the victim as Jasmine Featherstone of Elizabeth, New Jersey. Jasmine was 23 years old at the time her life was ended, and previously lived in Middletown, Connecticut. The identification was announced in June 2023. The investigation into what exactly happened to Jasmine is still ongoing by investigators. Anyone with information about the case is urged to call the Union County Prosecutor's Office and speak to Sergeant Lamar Hartfield at 908-451-1873. Tips can be submitted anonymously by phone at 908-654. Tips. If you provide a tip that leads to an indictment and conviction, you are eligible for a reward of up to $10,000. In October 1997, a duck hunter located a dismembered female torso in a stream known as the Ryan Slough, just north of Eureka, in Humboldt County, California. The remains were recovered, however. Attempts to identify the female were unsuccessful. In January 1998, additional remains were located and recovered on Clam Beach in California. On November 3, 1998, Wayne Adam Ford arrived at the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office main station in possession of a female body part that he carried around in a plastic bag. Ford, an ex-Marine, subsequently admitted to taking the lives of several women throughout the North State, including the unidentified female. According to him, it was 4 women in total whose lives he ended. Investigators interviewed Ford, who worked as a long-haul trucker numerous times, obtaining descriptive details of the woman. Ford's home was searched as part of the investigation. Investigators located additional remains belonging to the female recovered from the slough. Attempts to identify the woman were made, but ultimately were unsuccessful. Ford was born in Petaluma, California on December 3, 1961. His parents divorced when he was 10. He dropped out of high school and enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, where he served 6 years before being honorably discharged in 1985. In November 1980, he was hit by a drunk driver, causing a head injury and leaving him in a coma for 9 days. According to his relatives, his personality drastically changed after the incident. Beginning in 1983, he had escalating problems at work with psychological decline, necessitating several hospitalizations. Ford was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. He had a series of scrapes with the law, including allegations of beating and robbing a woman in 1986 in Garden Grove, California. In 1990, he was arrested for animal cruelty, for which he served a brief jail sentence in San Clemente, California. Between 1997 and 1998, he took the lives of at least 4 women while working. He lived in a trailer park in Arcata, California. His first victim was the unknown female whose life he had taken in October 1997. The second victim was 26-year-old Tina Renee Gibbs. She lost her life on May 16, 1998, near Las Vegas, Nevada. Her body was found on June 2nd, near Buttonwillow, California. The third victim was 25-year-old Lynette Diane White. He ended her life on September 25, 1998, in Ontario, California, then dumped her body near Lodi, California. The fourth victim was 29-year-old Patricia Ann Thames, whose life was taken in Hesperia, California. Her body was found on October 23, 1998, in an aqueduct in San Bernardino, California. In June of 2006, Ford was convicted of taking the 4 women's lives in a San Bernardino County court and was sentenced to be executed in August 2006. He is still currently behind bars at the San Quentin State Prison in California. Through the years, Humboldt County Sheriff's Office investigators never gave up on attempting to identify Ford's unknown female victim. They routinely searched missing person reports from all of the West Coast to obtain leads. Using DNA, investigators were able to confirm that the remains located on Clam Beach were also that of the unknown female. The DNA was entered into both the California Missing Persons DNA database and the National Unidentified Persons DNA Index. The DNA profile was routinely searched against profiles from both missing persons and other human remains in the combined DNA index system. No profile matches were ever made. The case was eventually entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Humboldt County Sheriff's Office Sheriff William Hunsell created a cold case unit in 2021. He assigned 2 investigators to exclusively review their unsolved cases for new leads. In December of 2022, the Sheriff's Office and the California Department of Justice partnered with Othram Incorporated to determine if advanced forensic DNA testing could help establish the identity of the unknown female or a close relative. The California Department of Justice sent Othram a DNA extract from the unknown woman's remains. Othram scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the victim. Utilizing this profile and forensic genealogy, a potential DNA match was developed for a close relative of the victim. Investigators contacted the relative, inquiring if they had any family members that were possibly missing. The relative stated that their family member, Carrie, had been missing since the mid-1990s. Investigators were able to track down Carrie's sister, Kathy, who confirmed that Carrie's last contact with family was in 1997. Kathy provided investigators with a DNA sample, which was then compared to the DNA sample from the unknown female's remains. These DNA profiles were confirmed to be a genealogical match, officially identifying the remains as that of Carrie and Cummings, born in 1972. She was 25 years old when her life was taken. During her last contact with family in 1997, Carrie was suffering from untreated mental illness and told family that she was couch surfing in the Eugene, Oregon area. Despite multiple offers from her family members, she refused to come home. Kathy told investigators that after Carrie went missing, her parents tried to report her missing in Arizona and Oregon. They even hired a private investigator. But due to laws surrounding the report of missing persons at that time, a missing persons report was never taken. Therefore, Carrie was never listed as missing person or entered into any national missing persons database. Unfortunately, back then they were told that Carrie was an adult, that she had chosen the lifestyle, and that if she was not a threat to herself or others, there was nothing that law enforcement could do, Kathy said. As the internet expanded, I took to searching the Name Us website when I was missing her, scanning for mention of her tattoo, and searching through the pictures of the Jane Does. She was dearly loved. The Humboldt County Coroner's Division is working with family members to release Carrie's remains for burial with other family members that are not alive anymore. I would like to thank the California Department of Justice DNA Lab and Othram for once again providing outstanding work and assistance in solving this case, Sheriff William Hunsell said. While we can't take away the pain of loss, we hope that this identification can help bring closure to Carrie's family and the community. I am thankful for the dedication of our investigators who never gave up on Carrie and continue to seek resolution for the outstanding cases that remain to be solved. While investigators are still convinced that Wayne Adam Ford is responsible, anyone with information about this case is asked to contact investigator Mike Fridley at 707-441-3024. On October 26, 1978, the Pershing County Sheriff's Office received a report that human remains were found in Pershing County, Nevada, approximately 13 miles west of Imlay near Scosa Road. Officers with the Pershing County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene and located the human remains inside of a garment bag buried in a shallow grave. Investigators collected several evidentiary items at the scene, including women's clothing inside of the garment bag. The clothing items included a dark green sweater with a white safety pin attached to the front, dark green trousers, and a long-sleeved pink sweater. The unidentified individual's remains were transferred to Washoe Medical Center in nearby Reno, Nevada, where an autopsy was performed. The medical examiner determined that the remains belonged to a Caucasian female who was approximately 40 to 50 years old at the time when her life was lost. Due to the condition of her remains, it was unclear what exactly happened to the woman, but investigators believed foul play was involved. Unfortunately, there was no identifying information on the victim's body found during the course of the investigation. In May of 1979, the Pershing County Sheriff's Office requested the investigative assistance of the Nevada Department of Public Safety Investigation Division, which led to an extensive investigation in an attempt to identify the woman. The investigation included the submission of dental records for comparison purposes. They worked with the FBI to obtain identifying information from the articles of clothing. A mitochondrial DNA profile was obtained from the woman. A facial reconstruction was made to not only give you nightmares, but also in hopes that someone recognized the woman. Investigators entered the case into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Investigators followed up on many tips and compared numerous missing persons reports without establishing a significant lead. Despite investigators' efforts, the identity of the woman remained a mystery. She then became known as the 1978 Imlay Jane Doe. For over 44 years, she would remain unidentified. Then, in March 2022, investigators, along with NAMUS, enlisted the assistance of Othram in hopes of identifying the unknown woman. Funding for the advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy used in this case was provided by NAMUS, a national clearinghouse that assists the criminal justice community with the investigation and resolution of missing, unidentified, and unclaimed persons cases across the United States and its territories. Forensic evidence was submitted to Othram's laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas, and Othram scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to develop a comprehensive DNA profile for the unidentified woman. Othram's in-house genealogy team used the profile to develop investigative leads that were returned to law enforcement investigators. David Middleman, the CEO at Othram, said, "That allows you to find people who are even remotely related. It may not be the person that you have over for the holidays, but it will be a genetic relative, maybe a third or fourth cousin." Investigators were then able to determine that the unidentified woman is 67-year-old Florence Charleston of Cleveland, Ohio. Detective Sean Costner said, "The genealogy profile that was processed through these remains was successfully matched to a couple in Ohio." Nevada State Police ended up finding and testing the DNA of Florence's granddaughter, Donna Taylor, and in March of 2023 found a 100% familial match between Donna and the remains found near Imlay, Nevada. "When the detective first contacted me, I thought it was a joke," Donna said. A subsequent investigation revealed that Florence moved to Portland, Oregon sometime in the early 1970s and family members lost contact with her around 1978. Relatives of Florence say she was a fun-loving person who was easy to be around. Diane Liggett, Florence's niece, said, "Every kid should have an aunt like her. We all used to tell stories in our family for years how much fun she was growing up with her. We all missed her when she went up to Portland and basically disappeared shortly thereafter." Florence was born in 1911 and was happily married until her husband passed away. Her granddaughter, Donna Taylor, said, "After she lost her husband, she seemed to become a little needy with men." Donna Taylor was still a child when Florence moved from their hometown of Cleveland, Ohio to an apartment building on Southeast Milwaukee Avenue in Portland with her boyfriend. Donna said the guy that she relocated to Portland with. He had contacted us saying that they had gone to Hawaii to look for a condo to purchase. And when they flew back to the Portland airport, she ran away from him. "I really believed that she became homeless and just lost her life on the street. That is how I coped with it." Donna said the last time she ever talked to her grandma was over the phone in 1977. She was a junior in high school. This was a year before Florence's body was found. "When everything is over and done with, I am going to bring her back to Cleveland for a proper burial. I need her back. She has been in limbo all this time. I will put her in the cemetery with her son, my dad." The investigation into what exactly happened with Florence is still ongoing. Anyone with information about the case is asked to contact the Nevada Department of Public Safety Investigation Division at 775-684-7456. On January 27, 1996, the body of an unidentified female was located by a passerby in Beaumont, California. The discovery was made in a rural hilly area in a ravine south of the eastbound Highway 60 near Gilman Springs Road. A couple driving through the area flagged down a law enforcement officer and informed him of the body off the side of the road. Investigators who arrived at the scene believed that her life had been taken a few hours prior to the discovery. The victim appeared Hispanic, American Indian, or possibly Asian. She was found on her back with a gunshot wound to her head. There was also evidence that she had been assaulted. The victim did not have any identification or a purse. Her clothing was clean and in good condition. There were no investigative leads at the time of the incident. The woman's short tandem repeat profile was obtained and entered into missing and unidentified person section in California. She was somewhere between 30 and 45 years old. Both her hair and her eyes were brown. She was about 5 foot 1 inch tall and weighed 130 pounds. The woman had a surgical scar on her right abdomen. Surrounding agencies were contacted regarding possible missing persons, matching the description of the Jane Doe. Her case was also entered into NAMUS. Detectives had a composite sketch of her completed and utilized local media in an attempt to generate investigative leads. Eventually, with all leads exhausted and still no closer to identifying the woman, the case went cold. Recently, the Riverside County Regional Cold Case Team partnered with Othram to use advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy to generate new leads in the case. Forensic DNA evidence was sent to Othram and their scientists using forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile. The The profile was returned to law enforcement investigators, who then used the profile to conduct genetic genealogy research. Using genealogy and other public databases such as the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, investigators located the victim's 4 daughters. The California Department of Justice Riverside Crime Lab, through its Missing and Unidentified Person System, was then able to positively identify the victim as Juana Roses Zagel of the Los Angeles area. The announcement of the investigation was made on June 26, 2023. She was 41 years old when her life was taken. One of Juana's daughters said, "He destroyed my family. He did not just take the life of one person. He took the lives of all of us. I really, really wish if somebody knows something, they can let us know. Because for me, all of this is so difficult. But at the same time, I really want to know who is responsible." Detectives believe there are still friends, neighbors, or colleagues of Juana who may be able to provide more information to help clarify her disappearance. Anyone who knew Juana or has any further information is asked to contact detectives at 951-955-0740 or 951-955-2777. Laurel Jean Mitchell was born on May 24, 1958, in Whitley County, Indiana, to parents Richard and Wilma Mitchell. She grew up in North Webster, Indiana, with her siblings, Sarah and Bruce. With a population of about 500 at the time, North Webster was extremely safe, a place where residents often did not lock doors, where parents felt comfortable letting their children ride bikes up and down the traffic-free streets. It was a community where everyone knew each other and folks spent hours hanging out on their front porches. By 1975, 17-year-old Laurel was a senior at Wawasee High School. She was employed at Cokesbury Inn in the Epworth Forest neighborhood on the shores of Webster Lake. For her, working at the restaurant was a perfect opportunity to gain valuable experience. While earning some extra money, she was determined to make the most of every moment, and with this attitude, she threw herself into the job with all the energy and enthusiasm she could muster. In no time, Laurel Mitchell had become a favorite among the staff and the customers. Laurel was involved in a local church youth group and was part of a traveling singing group called God's Children. They traveled all over the United States singing. The group had made some records and had a couple of albums. Laurel was described as very, very religious. Most of her free time was spent at the church. Despite the occasional argument, Laurel and her siblings had a tight-knit bond that only grew stronger with time. Laurel was a beloved figure in the community, where her warm smile and demeanor won over the hearts of everyone she met. One of her most endearing qualities was her unwavering kindness and her caring nature. The neighborhood children were particularly fond of Laurel. It was not uncommon to see her surrounded by children all clamoring for her attention. Laurel had many talents. She had a natural gift for singing, so it was no surprise that she was a key member of the local church choir. Laurel was also an accomplished dancer who honed her skills by taking lessons at a local studio. For Laurel, singing and dancing were more than just hobbies. They were a way of life. August 6, 1975 started out as a typical day. Laurel and her siblings had morning chores that they completed. Laurel went to work at around 2 p.m. 12-year-old Sarah stayed home. Their brother Bruce was married and in the Army in California. One of Laurel's friends from Michigan stayed with the family. Laurel left work at the snack bar around 10 p.m. She was supposed to meet friends at the Adventureland amusement park about a half-mile walk away. One of her co-workers offered Laurel a ride, but she declined and said she'll walk instead. Laurel was seen walking towards the amusement park on the north side of North Webster. This was the last time she was seen alive. It was a family friend named Scott Pruitt who saw Laurel at the pillars of the entrance of Epworth Forest. He waved at her and she waved back at him. She then went past the pillars. Laurel never met up with her friends. They decided to go to the county fair instead. This included the friend from Michigan. As a result, no one was aware that Laurel was missing until she did not come home at midnight. Laurel was responsible, known to call her parents if she was going to be late arriving home. When she did not return home by curfew that night, her family knew something was wrong. It was confirmed when the friend from Michigan arrived at the Mitchell's house and asked, "Where's Laurel?" Her friends thought she went home, and her family thought she was with her friends. This led to her parents, Richard and Wilma Mitchell, reporting her as a missing person at 4:16 a.m. the next morning. The dispatcher took their information and promised to send a unit out to their home to take a report. An extensive search was then launched by the police, family members, and friends of Laurel. Richard Mitchell went out and walked the ditches up and down the road in case she had been hit by a car and thrown off to the side. Concerned neighbors and friends gathered together to search for her by combing through the woods and checking roadsides. Investigators determined that Laurel never made it to Adventureland. It was clear to them something happened on the way there. A few hours after being reported missing at 10:30 a.m., a fisherman named Glenn Dixon and his son found a woman's body in the Elkhart River at the Mallard Roost Public Access Site on Noble County Road, 600 North, just west of 400 West. They called 911. The officers waded into the water and pulled the body up onto the bank. They reported seeing a white female laying face down on the west bank of the river near the boat landing ramp. The body was floating about waist deep. State police could not immediately identify the woman. They estimated the body had been there about a day. Police checked out missing persons reports in the area fitting the victim's description. She was described as 5 feet 5 inches, weighing about 160 pounds with long brown hair. Police then identified the woman as Laurel Mitchell with her class ring from Wawasee High School, class of 1976, with her initials LJM engraved inside. At first, investigators believed it was an accidental drowning, despite Laurel being a strong swimmer. That was until the autopsy report came back. The autopsy was performed later in the day on August 7, 1975, by Dr. P. L. Sankey at the Goshen General Hospital. The autopsy showed that she was forcibly drowned as well as assaulted. The autopsy also showed signs that Laurel made a violent struggle in order to survive. The police speculated that much of the evidence of the crime had washed away in the water, as only a small bruise was present on Laurel's hand and a few abrasions under her arms. After the discovery of Laurel, police vehicles pulled up outside Laurel's parents' home. Richard and Wilma were anxiously waiting for any news of their daughter's whereabouts. They were not prepared for the news that was about to be delivered to them. As the officers told them what had happened, Richard's eyes filled with tears. Wilma as well was inconsolable. Laurel's funeral was seen as a testament to the sense of community in North Webster. There were so many flowers at the funeral home that there was no room for the people. An enormous crowd of well-wishers, friends, and family members had come to pay their respects to Laurel Mitchell, who had been taken from them far too soon. They had to move the funeral to the church. Laurel's sister Sarah said that she does not remember the sermon at all. "I just remember sitting between my dad and my brother, and they were both squeezing my hand so hard. When we walked out the door of the church, there were people lined up all down the street that couldn't even fit inside the church." The investigation into Laurel's demise intensified after her funeral, with detectives from multiple state and local agencies working round the clock to solve the case. They combed through evidence and interviewed many more individuals. A person called investigators at 3:15 p.m. on August 9, 1975. The person had some important information, but it was not clear. The caller hung up before they got the full message or her identity. Investigators made an appeal for the person to contact them again, and they would do their best to keep her identity private. Police set up a headquarters for the continuing investigation in North Webster. One local witness, identified as Catherine Flynn, said around 10 p.m. that night, she heard a loud car turn around next door. She said she heard voices say, "Let's get her." Investigators interviewed Catherine, who lived half a mile east of Epworth Forest on Epworth Forest Road. She said she was home on Wednesday, August 6, 1975, and that around 10 p.m. or a little later, an old car turned into the drive next door and turned around as it came back by her house. She informed investigators that she heard several voices say, "Let's get her." She said the car was very loud and probably a dark color. Another local, Frank Overmeyer, told investigators he also heard a loud vehicle in the neighborhood, possibly an Oldsmobile Cutlass. They went to interview Frank Overmeyer and his wife on August 14, 1975. The Overmeyers lived on Epworth Forest Road, just west of Epworth Forest. Frank Overmeyer said on August 6, 1975, he was at home watching TV and heard a loud car go by, and the car turned around and stopped east of their house. Frank reported he then heard what he thought sounded like someone slamming the trunk on a car. Frank reported he turned on his porch light and stepped outside. When he stepped out, 2 cars were leaving the area. The first car was the one that had gone by his house that he described was a red-orange GM product, possibly an Oldsmobile Cutlass. The second vehicle was a medium green Mustang. The Oldsmobile was very loud and sounded like it was loud by design. All of the clothing and belongings found on Laurel's body were collected and preserved for DNA testing, including shoes, a sweatshirt, bra, underwear, and denim jeans. Unfortunately, due to the lack of DNA technology at the time, there was little that could be done with the clothing. Detectives from the Kosciuszko County Sheriff's Department and Indiana State Police examined the case closely through the years. The location of Laurel's abduction and the discovery of her body in the Elkhart River, about 15 miles from Epworth Forest, seemed to indicate that the perpetrator was familiar with the area. Many people were interviewed, and despite there being a $5,000 reward offered, there was never enough evidence to charge anyone. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the case slowly faded from the headlines and went cold. For Laurel's family and friends, the pain of her loss remained. In 2007, Indiana State Police Captain Kevin Smith was assigned as the lead investigator on Laurel's case. He was a man on a mission and was determined to provide answers that had eluded Laurel's family for so long. The pressure was on. But Captain Smith knew that he would do whatever it takes to give Laurel's loved ones the closure they deserved. Despite his best efforts, no new leads or evidence surfaced for several years, leaving him and his team frustrated. Then, on January 16, 2012, Laurel's father, Richard Mitchell, passed away. He was a well-known public figure in North Webster. Laurel's mother, Wilma Mitchell, also passed away in 2012. She operated the North Webster Food Pantry for several years. They passed never knowing what exactly happened to their 17-year-old daughter or why. It was a heartbreaking end for a couple who had dedicated their lives to seeking answers and closure for their daughter. In 2013, a woman called Renee from Port Charlotte, Florida, came forward and gave investigators a lot of useful information. Detective Donovan interviewed Renee on June 7, 2013. She informed the detective that she lived in Noble County as a teenager and that she was 16 years old in 1975. She went on a date with a man named John Wayne Lehman, and while on the date, they went to a party. After the party, John Wayne Lehman was driving her home when Lehman admitted his involvement in a crime that he committed with his friend, Fred Bandy Jr. Lehman provided details of the crime to Renee that are consistent with the findings made by police where Laurel's body was found and the anatomical findings made by Dr. Sankey during the autopsy of her body. On July 3, 2014, investigators interviewed Bill McDonald at the Ligonier Police Department. Bill indicated that back in 1975, he was a sophomore at West Noble High School and that he socialized with a man named Fred Bandy Jr. Bill told investigators that Bandy told him that he had committed the crime that took place at Mallard's Roost, which was a public access site adjacent to the location where Laurel's body was found. Also in 2014, Captain Kevin Smith received information about a local music group that performed in Epworth Forest the night of August 6, 1975. They were identified as the Celebrate the Sun group. This generated renewed interest in the case. Unfortunately, it did not lead anywhere. Captain Smith said, "I feel pretty confident after speaking with someone from that group. I don't believe they have information that will help." On September 25, 2019, Noble County Sheriff's Department Detective Joe Hutzel met with Rick Johnson to interview him about the Laurel Mitchell case. Rick Johnson informed Detective Hutzel that he was friends with Bill McDonald, and that while he was in high school, Bill McDonald, Fred Bandy, John Wayne Lehman, and others were at a party together. While at the party, a conversation about the slaying of Laurel Mitchell came up, and Fred Bandy Jr. stated he and John Wayne Lehman committed that crime together. Investigators needed more than just reports from witnesses. They needed DNA evidence linking Bandy and Lehman to the crime. Advances had been made in cold cases in recent years due to new technology such as genetic genealogy, which involves putting a suspect or victim's DNA profile into a public database, allowing them to reverse engineer a family tree. This enables investigation of multiple branches of a family's tree to determine who could be a viable suspect in an unsolved case. Another recent advancement factoring into solving cold cases is the use of touch DNA samples. This method requires minuscule amounts of DNA, such as skin cells from the perpetrator, that may be left on objects at a crime scene. A breakthrough enabling an accurate genotype from rootless hair is another technique now available. Until 2019, forensic scientists were only able to extract DNA from hairs found at crime scenes if the root of the hair was attached. Unfortunately, most hairs do not have the root attached. This breakthrough in DNA extraction from rootless hair is extremely useful in solving crimes. Solving cold cases often involves a diligent and time-consuming re-examination of evidence from files and the efforts of experienced investigators. By 2019, Laurel Mitchell's close-in evidence were resubmitted for DNA testing. In February 2020, a certificate of analysis was generated by Indiana State Police Laboratory Division that showed a male DNA profile was developed from the clothing. After 3 suspects were eliminated as possibilities, attention shifted to Fred Bandy for a buccal swab. Bandy voluntarily provided the DNA sample on December 5, 2022, at his residence. On January 13, 2023, the state laboratory found that Fred Bandy Jr.'s buccal swab showed he is 13 billion times more likely to be the contributor of the DNA on Laurel Mitchell's clothing than any other unknown person. A review of Indiana State Police records also disclosed that Bandy was driving a 1971 Oldsmobile at the time, which is consistent with eyewitness statements from area residents on that fateful night. Investigators concluded that Lehman and Bandy, with premeditated malice, used Bandy's Oldsmobile to bring Laurel to the Mallard Roost public access site in Noble County, where they forcibly removed her from the vehicle and deliberately drowned her. While the Indiana State Police declined to comment on the specific techniques used to solve the case, Ashley Hall, the director of the Forensic Science Graduate Program at the University of California, explained. She said the method seemed to be a standard genetic identification technology used in crime labs called STR. Or short tandem repeat. The technology is developing to become more and more sensitive. It is being developed to pick up smaller and smaller amounts of DNA. We can pick up much more DNA than we used to be able to. Laurel Mitchell's case is a good example of the power and evolution of DNA testing to assist in criminal investigations, Dr. Hall said. Captain Kevin Smith, who has been working the case for over 20 years, said, playing a significant role in charges being filed was the Indiana State Police Laboratory Division. We simply could not have solved this case without them. He also said that the investigation of the case had followed a similar pattern of other such cases. Witnesses pass away, memories fade. All those hurdles make it very difficult, especially when you go back this far. February 6, 2023, the Indiana State Police arrested 67-year-old John Wayne Lehman and 67-year-old Fred Bandy Jr. It was announced to the public that John Lehman and Bandy Jr., both 67-year-old residents of Indiana, have been identified as the suspects responsible for what happened to Laurel Jean Mitchell. Bandy lived in 1014 5th Street in Goshen, Indiana, and Lehman lived at 108 Clark Street in Auburn, Indiana. Both are being held without bond at the Noble County Jail. This is not the first time that Fred Bandy Jr. is in trouble with the law. He is a twice-convicted child abuser and deemed a violent predator. In 2001, he pleaded guilty to child solicitation and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. In 2016, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of child abuse and served nearly 6 years. During an initial hearing on February 8, 2023, Bandy and Lehman were informed by Noble Circuit Court Judge Michael Kramer they each face a charge of taking Laurel's life in the first degree. With current Indiana law, an individual convicted of such a charge faces a prison sentence between 45 and 65 years, with the advisory sentence being 55 years. However, since Laurel's slaying occurred in 1975, if the men are convicted, Bandy and Lehman could be sentenced to life in prison, which was the maximum possible prison sentence at that time. Also during the initial hearing, a pretrial conference for both Bandy and Lehman was scheduled for 1:30 p.m. on April 24, 2023 in Noble County. Laurel's sister Sarah, who was 12 years old back in 1975, recently did an interview with the New York Times after the arrests were made. She described their childhood in North Webster as typical before the horror visited her family. It was just a very small town. Laid back. We felt safe, she said. We came and went as we pleased in the summer and parents did not worry about us. She was a really good person. It's like, gosh, you picked somebody really good to do this to. Somebody who could have done a lot of good in this world. I'm very glad they were finally arrested and very appreciative of the people who came forward. Sarah recalled how Captain Smith had carried around big books that detailed the names and addresses of everyone the authorities had interviewed over the years. There were over 1,000 names in there, she said. When Captain Smith called Sarah and her brother, Bruce Mitchell, to let them know they had arrested 2 men, she was surprised, but mostly wished her parents had been alive to see it. It has been 47 years, she said, but right now it feels like yesterday. 12-year-old Sarah Mitchell was the only one that could sleep that night when Laurel did not arrive home. She woke up the next morning more surprised than anything that her sister Laurel hadn't come home yet. Young Sarah had a softball game that day and her parents encouraged her to still go to the game. About halfway through the game, a neighbor woman showed up in the Mitchell family's car. I saw her pull up to the ball diamond, Sarah said. Sarah immediately yelled at her coach that she had to go. The neighbor only told her that she had been sent to pick her up. When they neared the house, it was swarmed with police cars. The neighbor said they're there to look for her sister. I walked in the back door and there was my dad. He was crying, Sarah said. He told her that Laurel was gone. Gone, she asked. It did not register in her 12-year-old mind. Gone where? Then her father broke the news. Her big sister, the one who used to have to take her everywhere because, well, that's what big sisters have to do, was not alive anymore. Sarah also said what she thought of Lehman and Bandy when she first saw them in court. At 12, they would have been scary. They look like very frail men. I do not need to be afraid of them. I am glad they are going to be punished, that they won't be able to hurt anyone else. But she's still not coming back to us. Convictions would not bring closure for me. I do not think there is such a thing. We will continue to grieve. The Grimmer family. January 12, 1970 was meant to be a typical day for the Grimmer family. Originally from Bristol, England, they had made the life-altering choice to move to Australia 2 years earlier. They had settled in Illawarra, New South Wales at the Fairy Meadow Migrant Hostel, where the family consisted of 26-year-old Carol, 24-year-old Vince, 7-year-old Ricky, 5-year-old Stephen, 4-year-old Paul, and 3-year-old Cheryl. On January 12th, the Grimmers planned a visit to the nearby Fairy Meadow Beach. The only family member missing from the trip was Vince, who was working as a combat engineer for the Australian Army and couldn't join them. While the children played under the warm summer sun, the weather suddenly changed in the afternoon around 2 p.m. as winds picked up, shifting direction and blowing sand everywhere. At this point, Carol decided it was time to leave and started gathering their things. She instructed the children to wash off together in the shower block before they headed home. However, 10 minutes later, Ricky, the oldest child, approached his mother and explained that 3-year-old Cheryl was refusing to leave the shower block. Carol quickly followed Ricky back to the showers but found Cheryl was no longer there. Growing increasingly worried, the mother of 4 ran to a nearby house and asked the residents to call the police. Around this time, witnesses reported seeing a man carrying a girl they believed to be Cheryl. They recalled him holding the toddler up to drink from a water fountain before fleeing the scene, with Cheryl wrapped in a towel. It's now believed that the witnesses may have been mistaken in their recollection. Ricky later told police that he had picked up his younger sister so she could drink from the fountain. It's thought that the witnesses had seen this but mistook Ricky for an older man. Other reports at the time mentioned seeing Cheryl in a white car. New South Wales police arrived quickly, and the disappearance of the toddler triggered an extensive search. After 24 hours, authorities had formulated 4 theories regarding Cheryl's possible whereabouts. When announcing their findings to the press, the police shared that they believed there were several possibilities. Cheryl could have hidden herself somewhere and fallen asleep. She might have wandered into the ocean and been swept away. She could have fallen into a waterway. or she might have been taken by someone with malicious intent. Another 24 hours passed without any trace of the missing 3-year-old. Given the extensive search efforts, if Cheryl had experienced an accident or simply hidden herself, she would likely have been found by now. The absence of any sign of her led investigators to rule out the first 3 theories. Cheryl's disappearance was now being treated as a potential crime. Someone had taken her, and the challenge was now to figure out who. With several leads in hand, the police began their investigation into the individual responsible for Cheryl's abduction. Among the leads they pursued was a reported sighting of a blue Volkswagen Type 2 near the beach around the time of the disappearance. 3 days after Cheryl went missing, the police received a ransom letter, which they believed to be legitimate. The note writer demanded that they be given $10,000 in exchange for Cheryl's safe return. They noted that the 3-year-old was currently unharmed. Investigators got to work setting up a drop in the Wollongong suburb of Bully, placing officers dressed as council workers nearby. The money was dropped off, but the letter writer never collected the cash. It was initially feared that the large-scale police operation and the carefully placed undercover officers had spooked the perpetrator. But as the letter writer never made contact with the authorities again, it was assumed that the ransom demand was a hoax. By 1971, had still not been found, and the police had established 3 main suspects in the case, although none could be definitively identified as the man witnesses had seen on the day of the disappearance. 15 months after Cheryl went missing, a local teenager handed himself over to New South Wales police. The 17-year-old from Victoria claimed that he had abducted and taken the life of the toddler. He reportedly gave an overview of the events on January. The teenager provided a detailed description of the area where Cheryl was allegedly buried, mentioning tubular steel gates, a cattle guard, a track, and a small creek, which were all close to where her body was supposedly found. According to an article in the Illawarra Mercury, several pieces of information the teenager provided were specific details about the crime that only the person responsible could have known. He accurately described the blue swimsuit Cheryl was wearing on the day she disappeared, along with the white towels she had with her. The teenager also outlined the route he had taken from the beach to the Balgownie area, where he claimed to have buried her body. He even took detectives to the location, although it was under development for housing at the time. He allegedly told the police, "I think this is it, but it's all changed." However, when the police interviewed the property owner, his description was contradicted. The owner pointed out that the cattle guard had been installed recently, and it had not been there at the time of Cheryl's disappearance. He also noted that there had never been a tubular gate in the area. The discrepancies in the teenager's account led investigators to conclude that his confession was likely false. A police report written by Detective Sergeant Philip Finley stated that, without material evidence directly linking the teenager to the missing child, it would not be appropriate to take any further action at that time. Despite the efforts of police, which included several public appeals and the offering of a $5,000 reward, no trace of Cheryl Grimmer was ever found, and her case began to grow cold. Her family, in the meantime, decided to move back to the UK. The tragic story of their daughter's disappearance was nationwide and a public spectacle, and they struggled to live normally in Australia as they no longer had the anonymity they once did. For years, Cheryl's case lay dormant. The past, and then came the all without progress on the case. It wasn't until the case began to receive some media attention again when New South Wales Police Minister Mike Gallagher stated that while it was possible the 3-year-old and the culprit were both dead at this point, he hoped that someone might know the truth and might come forward with that information. He also speculated that the little girl had been alive for the last several decades without knowing her true identity. He encouraged anyone with questions about their past who may suspect they are the Grimmer's daughter to come forward. In February 2000, such woman came forward, but a DNA test proved she was not the missing toddler. In February, a coroner formally ruled that Cheryl was deceased, having passed away shortly after her disappearance. The cause of death was noted as being undetermined, and the coroner recommended that the New South Wales police reopen the investigation. Carol Grimmer noted her belief that her daughter was still alive, stating, "It's not just a mother's hope, it's annoying." Taking on board the coroner's advice, the police put forward a $100,000 reward for information regarding the case. Afterwards, Wollongong detectives and the Homicide Squad's Unsolved Homicide team combined into a new task force called Strike Force Wessel. In February 2016, a review of the evidence was carried out. Every detail was put into the police computer system for the first time, and fresh eyes on the case revealed that many leads had not been thoroughly followed by investigators back in 1970. Felt that the 1971 confession in particular had been dismissed too easily. Armed with this information, they made their way back to the property where the 17-year-old had claimed to have carried out the murder. Here, detectives questioned the landowner's son, who in fact contradicted everything his father had stated previously. He claimed that the cattle guard was certainly in place and that the tubular gate had been there too. There was also a track leading to a creek on the land. All of these details had been mentioned by the 17-year-old in his original statement. It is unclear why the property owner countered all of these claims in 1971. Later that year, it was revealed that 3 witnesses from 1970 had come forward after they recalled seeing a male teenager loitering around the shower block where Cheryl had gone missing. The police also announced they had a credible lead on a man who was spotted with a fair-haired child in his arms at the time of the disappearance. The man would be in his 60s, and they asked him to come forward. And began examining the Mounts Penang training school for boys. They believed that their prime suspect had spent time attending the reformatory school during the indicated that they had been provided with this information by someone who believed the former staff or students would be able to shed light on their inquiry. Then it appeared that the case had finally been cracked. The police announced on March 23rd that a man had been arrested in Frankston, a suburb of Melbourne, at 1 p.m., on that he was currently being extradited from Victoria. The individual whose name has been kept out of the public was charged at Wollongong Police Station with Cheryl's abduction and subsequent murder, and then imprisoned at the Silverwater Correctional Complex. Investigators noted that it was unlikely Cheryl's body would ever be recovered due to the fact that much development had occurred over the years since her death. 1 month later, the police announced that they were trying to trace a family who gave a witness statement on the day of the abduction. Shortly after the toddler went missing, the family moved to Papua New Guinea, then back to their native Nottinghamshire in England. Interpol assisted in tracing the family, and they were eventually located. Their testimonies were believed to be highly important in the court case. Yet another month passed, and in May 0, it was revealed that the suspect in custody was the same person who, as a 17-year-old, had confessed to the slayings back in 1971. At the time, his admittance had been dismissed due to inconsistencies, but investigators had now dispelled those inconsistencies. The accused was currently 63 years old, but was around 16 at the time of the murder, making him a minor. It is for this reason his name has never been disclosed. The individual had been born in the UK like Cheryl and had moved to Australia during this time. More information about the man's confession was revealed, and it was chillingly noted that he had told doctors in 1970 that he had urges to kill himself and kill other people. In his 1971 admission, the suspect claimed that he'd hidden with Cheryl in a nearby drain for about 35 minutes after he had taken her. He gagged her with a handkerchief and tied her hands behind her back. Emerging from the drain, he walked around 1.8 miles with the toddler to Balgony. According to the case prosecutor, the suspect intended on sexually assaulting Cheryl, although the 63-year-old would later deny this claim, labeling it as bullshit. In his confession, he told the police that he had removed the gag from Cheryl's mouth, but that she'd started to scream and ignored him when he told her to shut up. He quickly put his hands around her neck and strangled her to death in a bid to get her to be quiet. Afterwards, he panicked, removed her clothes, and placed bushes and dirt over her body before he returned to Fairy Meadow Beach. Later, the suspect sought bail. Prosecutors were opposed to this, claiming he was a flight risk as he was not an Australian citizen and still possessed a British passport. The prosecution noted the evidence against the 63-year-old was strong, stating, he said that he'd been staying at the time in a Sydney hostel and caught the train to Fairy Meadow that morning and hung out at the beach. He then provided significant details in relation to the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Cheryl, details of which are confirmed by eyewitness accounts and details which the prosecution says could only be known to the offender. Meanwhile, the suspect's lawyer, Laura Fennell, said that it would be argued at trial that her client was significantly mentally unwell at the time of his 1971 confession, rendering his admittance inadmissible. She added that the case was already troublingly weak and that in that he had also admitted to the slaying of a prison guard, but this was found to be untrue. Ultimately, Magistrate Michael Stoddard refused bail, stating, "In my interview, on the face of it, there's a strong case against the accused in relation to the charge of murder." He noted that there were no bail conditions that could lessen the risk he posed if he was released. The suspect appeared at the Supreme Court of New South Wales on September 7, 2018 via a video link. He confirmed his name, entered a not guilty plea, and said nothing further. His trial was due to begin on Friday, February 15, 2019. However, a judge ruled that a key part of the prosecution's case could not be used as evidence in the trial, the evidence being the suspect's 1971 confession. The admittance couldn't be used as the suspect was a minor at the time and did not have an adult representative present during the police interview. And even though this wasn't legally necessary in the rule that the interview should be excluded on the basis of unfairness. He also referenced testimony from psychologists who'd reviewed the case for trial and noted that the 63-year-old had low intellect and would be more vulnerable to influence at the time. As this evidence was crucial to the case, the prosecution felt they were unable to continue forward. The man was released and his case has remained dormant since. Carol and Vince Grimmer passed away shortly after the case was reopened but Cheryl's brothers, Ricky and Stephen, have expressed their surprise and distress at the outcome of recent events. Ricky Nash told reporters, "We're just a bit numb, a bit shocked. No words can describe how I feel at the moment." In February 2016, Stephen Grimmer shared his deep sense of loss, saying, "My mom and dad have passed on not knowing, and we want to know too before we pass on." Ricky, the eldest of the Grimmer brothers, seems to have been most affected by Cheryl's disappearance, revealing, "The decisions I made on the day were wrong. It's been with me all my life. I just want it over with. I shouldn't have left." He added, "Everyone says it's not your fault. Come and stand where I'm standing. See what it feels like." Ricky also expressed a desire to know where his sister's remains were, stating, "Give us something that we can go and mourn." Cheryl Jean Grimmer was last seen at the shower block on Fairy Meadow Beach, New South Wales, on January 12, 1970. At just 3 years old, she stood 3 feet tall, with blonde hair and blue eyes. A distinguishing feature of Cheryl was a navel that protruded 1 centimeter due to a medical condition. On the day of her disappearance, she was wearing a royal blue swimming suit with net paneling and carrying a white towel. A $1 million reward is currently being offered for information regarding her case. If you have any details, you can contact Crime Stoppers at 33,000. Moving on to the next case. Joy Hibbs. On April 19, 1991, around 1 p.m., David Hibbs returned home from school, eager to share the news that he had made the honor roll. However, upon approaching his house in Corydon, Pennsylvania, he noticed smoke billowing from the windows. He rushed to the back kitchen door, but heavy smoke prevented him from entering. As he observed the scene, he noticed the gas stove burners were all lit, which led him to believe that his mother, Joy Hibbs, had been cooking and perhaps forgotten to turn off the stove. In panic, David called out for help, and his neighbors, who were working nearby, heard him. They attempted to enter the house to find Joy, but the fire was too intense. They immediately called the fire department. Despite their efforts to control the blaze with a garden hose, the fire continued to rage until firefighters arrived. After what seemed like an eternity, the fire was finally extinguished. Tragically, a paramedic informed 10-year-old David that his mother had not survived. Firefighters discovered Joy's body in David's bedroom, where she had been brutally assaulted. She had been so badly burned that she was unrecognizable. While the initial belief was that Joy had died in an accidental fire, an autopsy revealed a chilling truth. There was no sign that Joy had inhaled smoke, suggesting she had already been dead before the fire started. Further investigation uncovered that she had been violently attacked, strangled with wire cords, and stabbed 5 times in the chest and neck. The fire, it seemed, had been deliberately set to destroy evidence. This was a clever cover-up approach by the killer, given that the house had been completely destroyed from the fire, and that the neighbors had destroyed important evidence while attempting to put out the fire. According to the findings of the fire marshal's investigation, the fire originated from 4 different locations in the home, 2 in the kitchen, 1 in David's bedroom, and 1 in the corridor. According to the investigators, the morning of her death, Joy had cashed her paycheck. Her purse's contents were tossed on the living room floor, and the police found her wallet stuffed under the couch. The absence of evidence was compounded by the difficulty the investigators experienced in determining a motive. Joy was adored by all, worked part-time as a medical assistant, and was committed to her family. David Hibbs described his mother as graceful, polite, and easygoing. Authorities had no leads whatsoever as to the person who would want to kill her. On the day she was killed, Joy had dropped her 2 kids off at school in the morning. She received her paycheck, ran a few errands, and got home shortly after 11 o'clock in the morning. A church pastor and another member of the congregation dropped by for a visit shortly after she returned home. Joy Hibbs had indicated a desire to celebrate Easter in the church. Just before noon, the pastor and a member of the church departed the Hibbs family house. According to eyewitnesses, there was a dark blue Monte Carlo parked across the Hibbs yard shortly after the church pastor and his member left. The car was said to have remained there until 1 p.m. 2 days after Joy Hibbs' murder, former Bristol County Police Chief Tommy Mills, who was also a narcotics detective, reached out to the residence of Robert Francis Atkins in Falls, Pennsylvania. Robert lived about 2 hours away from where Joy Hibbs lived. Joy and her husband would occasionally buy tiny amounts of marijuana from Robert Atkins, who also appeared to have been their former neighbor. Robert resisted letting the detectives into his house. In the driveway, Detective Tommy Mills spotted a dark-colored Monte Carlo that matched a witness's description of a similar vehicle parked carelessly outside Joy's house shortly before the neighborhood heard the fire. However, during further investigation, the witness said Robert Atkins' automobile wasn't the one they saw. Robert Atkins was invited to undergo a polygraph by the investigators, but he refused, explaining that he had damaged his arm and that his lawyer had instructed him to wait since the nerve damage would affect the polygraph results. He further disclosed that he was camping at the Poconos with his family, friends, and co-workers when Joy's murder took place. Detectives soon verified his alibi. Robert confirmed that he bought a little marijuana for the Hibbs, but he wasn't a dealer. In the weeks preceding his mother's murder, David Hibbs overheard her arguing with Robert Atkins on the phone over the most recent purchase of a baggie of marijuana. Because the baggie was packed with stems and seeds, Joy demanded her money back from Robert. When asked by the police, Robert confirmed these arguments. He, however, stated that he had informed Joy that he couldn't refund her the money. According to him, it was simply improper. Investigators couldn't understand how a few tiny baggies of marijuana could cause someone to die. The couple was only spending $20 to $40 on marijuana at a time, not enough to get the attention of major sellers. On April 27, 1991, a co-worker of April Atkins, the wife of Robert Atkins, came forward to say that on the day Joy Hibbs was murdered, she had called the Atkins residence between 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m., and Robert Atkins had picked up the call. On hearing this, the police now thought Joy's murder took place between 11:50 and 12:50. The police turned their attention to Joy's private life after determining that Robert Atkins' alibi appeared to be flawless. They questioned Joy's relatives and friends and found nothing unusual. Except for the person who had killed Joy, no one seemed to harbor any wicked intentions for her. Robert Atkins was still a person of interest in the case despite having an alibi, though. 23 years after Joy was brutally murdered, a new Bristol Township detective, Michael Slaughter, was assigned the cold case in April 2014. Detective Slaughter made the decision to visit April Atkins, who claimed that she had never been questioned by authorities regarding the death of Joy Hibbs. She, however, clung to the narrative that her family was on vacation in the Poconos that weekend and hadn't learned of Joy's murder until they returned. A few days later, Detective Slaughter re-interrogated Robert Atkins regarding his movements at the time of Joy's death. He supported his wife's account of going camping and revealed to Slaughter that he had been a secret narcotics informant in 1991, doing drug deals and then reporting them to the police. During an interview with Slaughter in May 2014, a co-worker of Joy claimed that on the Monday before she was killed, a man called Joy at work and threatened to kill her. The co-worker decided not to report the call to the police because Joy's husband was now the focus of the investigation at the time. 2 years later, in September 2016, April Adkins, who is now divorced, traveled to the Bristol Township Police Station in order to provide a taped statement regarding her ex-husband's whereabouts during the murder of Joy Hibbs. Detective Slaughter was informed by April that Robert Adkins had returned home covered in blood after allegedly stabbing someone and setting their home on fire. He then instructed her to gather the children, take a few days off work, and travel to the Poconos in the north. Out of anxiety and fear, April remained silent. That day, Robert Atkins took a shower after washing his blood-stained clothing. April Atkins didn't learn about the murder of Joy Hibbs until after her family returned from a trip to the Poconos. Despite the revelation, the case remained inactive for another 5 years. That was until November 2021, when Bucks County Detective David Hanks tracked down a former co-worker of April Atkins from 1991. Initially, the co-worker denied knowing April. However, when subpoenaed by the district attorney to testify before a grand jury about a phone call she had made to the Atkins household, the co-worker changed her story. The call had been answered by Robert Atkins, who was supposed to be camping in the Poconos at the time. In the following month, Detective Hanks managed to record a conversation between Robert Atkins and his ex-wife, April. This conversation led Robert to believe that April had informed her roommate about his involvement in Joy Hibbs' murder, which caused his anger and anxiety to escalate. Further damning testimony came from Robert's son, who in April 2022 testified that his father had confessed to him in December that he expected to be arrested soon for something that had happened many years ago. Robert had mentioned a woman dying in a fire before later revealing that she had been stabbed. After 31 years of evading justice, Robert Atkins was arrested in May 2022. He is currently being held at the Bucks County Correctional Facility, facing multiple charges, including first-degree and second-degree murder, 7 counts of arson, 2 counts of robbery, and 7 counts of first-degree arson, all related to the tragic death of Joy Hibbs. Moving on to the next case. Krista Bramlett. In 1996, 23-year-old Krista Bramlett lived in New Providence, Tennessee. Struggling financially, she resided in a mobile home, while her 2 young children had moved to live with her mother in Corpus Christi, Texas. Krista remained behind, hoping to finish her GED program. However, the area surrounding her home had become increasingly unsafe, plagued by rising crime rates, including burglaries and drug-related offenses. Sadly, Krista became one of the many victims of the community's worsening troubles. On the afternoon of October 28, 1996, her landlord knocked on the door of her mobile home in Sunnydale Mobile Home Park, located just off Peachers Mill Road. When there was no answer, the landlord grew concerned and decided to check inside. It was there that he discovered Krista's body. She had sustained injuries to her throat, and the autopsy revealed that she had been suffocated. Additionally, it was determined that she had been indecently assaulted. Investigators collected male DNA from her body and sent it to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's lab to create a DNA profile. The DNA profile was submitted into the combined DNA index system, but no matches could be made. Investigators were only able to confirm that the DNA belonged to a black male. Without any other leads in the case, investigators could not identify the culprit, and the case went cold. It was only on February 13, 2019 that the Clarksville Police Department detective, Michael Urey, got the news he was waiting for. The DNA in the combined DNA index system matched a man who was living in Phoenix, Arizona. The man is 48-year-old Kenneth Hudspeth. Hudspeth had never come up in the investigation up to this point, and he was on nobody's radar. In February, Detective Urey interviewed Hudspeth and discovered that he was indeed in Clarksville at the time Krista's life was taken. He moved away from the area in December of 1997. Hudspeth admitted that he knew Krista and said he was the last person to see her alive. As a result of the DNA evidence and this interview, Hudspeth was arrested and charged in connection with the case. Investigators also took a look at Hudspeth's arrest record. They could see that he had been arrested several times on charges like domestic assault and felony assault. He has spent time in Arizona and Texas prisons. This brings up the question, why wasn't his DNA collected years ago? In June 2019, Hudspeth made his first appearance in Montgomery County Court in connection with the charges against him. The case went to trial in September 2021. During the trial, half of a 3-hour interview conducted by Detective Ullery with Hudspeth was shown to the jury. Hudspeth admitted that he had been using drugs at the time and could not recall whether he had assaulted or killed Krista, but he expressed hope that he had not done so. It was also revealed that Hudspeth's DNA was found on Krista's body, on her bra, and on 2 cigarette butts collected from the scene. After 4 days of testimony, Kenneth Hudspeth was found guilty of all charges on September 11. In January 2022, at 51 years old, Hudspeth was sentenced to life in prison, with an additional 20 years for his crimes. Denise Balser. Denise Balser was a 24-year-old woman residing in Raymond, New Hampshire, and working as a bookkeeper for a small company. On January 17, 1985, she vanished, leaving behind only one clue, a note. When her husband returned home, he discovered the message, which read, "We've got your wife." A few days later, authorities located her pickup truck parked at Logan Airport in Boston. Denise's social security card, birth certificate, and credit cards were neatly arranged and left in the car. Authorities initially pursued the theory that she had been kidnapped but found no substantial evidence beyond the cryptic note. Later, they considered the possibility that she had left voluntarily, though her close-knit family suspected foul play. A year after her disappearance, Denise was indicted in absentia for embezzling $12,000 from her employer. With no further leads, the case eventually went cold. That was until 17 years later in February 2002. It was then that the FBI believed that they found her. She was now going by the name of Denise Jones. She was still a bookkeeper and had started a new family. 42-year-old Denise was elated to see her family when they knocked on the door. She explained that her boss wanted to end her life because of the embezzlement. Denise claimed that it was closer to a $100,000 that she embezzled. The county prosecutors dropped the charges against her because her former boss was long deceased. Denise lived in South Carolina, the Bahamas, California, and Hawaii, while she was missing and lived in Florida since 1996. Her current husband was stunned, but said a lot of things that didn't make sense before did now. Denise would always be depressed on Mother's Day and out of sorts on holidays. She never talked about her family. Moving on to the next case. Keenan Day Bennett. In criminal cases, proving that a crime has taken place can be challenging when there is no body. Without this key evidence, the defense can argue that there is sufficient room for doubt, suggesting that the victim may have disappeared voluntarily. Historically, securing a conviction in murder cases without a body has been difficult. However, with advancements in forensic technology, we are now witnessing more cases where justice is achieved despite the absence of a body. On September 29, 2002, Vartasha McCullough informed Kmart staff that her 4-year-old daughter, Cananda Bennett, was missing. According to McCullough, they had visited the Kmart in Whiteville, North Carolina around 5 p.m. when the girl disappeared. Initially, McCullough claimed that Cananda vanished from an aisle in the store. However, she later revised her statement, saying she had entered the Kmart thinking her daughter was behind her, only to turn around and find her missing. McCullough and her daughter were from Conway, South Carolina, and had been visiting Cananda's uncle in Whiteville at the time. Although the Kmart staff called emergency CCTV cameras in the store, there was no footage showing the 4 of CCTV cameras in the store. There was no footage showing the 4-year-old. Investigators also found no evidence that Cananda had even entered the state. Aside from her parents, McCullough and Eddie Bennett Jr., who went by Kevin, no one had seen her in the 2 days leading up to her disappearance. Authorities searched the couple's car, but there was no child's seat in it, and no other signs that a young child had been present except a single Matchbox toy car, which they found wedged under a seat. As law enforcement officers became more doubtful about the McCullough story, They were approached by further witnesses from the couple's hometown who claimed that they had seen Cananda with bruises on her shoulder and face just days before she vanished. When asked about them, the 4-year-old said, "My mommy did it." While one witness did confront Cananda's mother, McCullough told them, "I'm going to whip her ass for telling you." Further fueling this idea, a second witness seeing cuts on the child's body and marks that looked as if they'd been caused by a strap. And Canine's grandparents had become so concerned for her welfare that on September 29th, the very day she went missing, they told the police in Conway that they suspected the 4-year-old was being abused. They had not seen Cananda in a week, and before contacting police, they went to confront their daughter with their suspicions. But while they heard someone moving around inside her apartment, nobody answered the door. Investigators noted that both of Cananda's parents seemed uninterested in her case and never asked for any updates beyond the first week of the investigation. Additionally, McCullough failed a polygraph test regarding her daughter's disappearance, while Cananda's father, Kevin Bennett, refused to take one, although both had samples of their blood and saliva taken. According to the authorities, both were uncooperative and both had inconsistencies in their stories. When McCullough was told that she had failed her polygraph, she reportedly cried. An officer said to her, "We both know that whatever happened to that child did not happen in North Carolina. It happened in that apartment, didn't it?" Here, Cananda's mother reportedly nodded. However, when she was asked to take them to where the body was, she told them she couldn't. After regaining her composure, McCullough retracted her previous admission and maintained that she had lost her daughter while at the Kmart store. When the police searched the family's home in Conway, things got worse. Investigators noted that the home had been sanitized with bleach, the smells still lingering in the air. 3 bottles of the substance, a damp mop, and several towels lay in plain sight. McCullough claimed that she was cleaning the apartment in preparation for an upcoming inspection by housing authorities, but officers believed she was attempting to clean up a crime scene. Searches of the home turned up transfer stains, which are stains left behind when fluid splatters are wiped, which matched Cananda's DNA. Authorities said that the scene would suggest that a physical assault had taken place. Furthermore, Cananda's toys and clothing had been thrown out, as if her parents didn't believe she'd be coming home. And both McCullough and Bennett used past tense when talking about their missing daughter. In February, Hennon's parents were arrested and charged with homicide by child abuse in connection with their daughter's case. Investigators claimed that the DNA evidence found in the apartment proved that the 4-year-old had died in Conway and had never even set foot in South Carolina. This, combined with the numerous witness statements about Cananda's abuse, led to the couple being charged. Around the same time, however, the parents accused the police of racism as they felt they did not conduct enough searches for their daughter. 2 years later, in February, Bennett's charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. McCullough, however, was charged with more crimes, including unlawful neglects of a child and inflicting grievous bodily harm on a child. Throughout her trial, McCullough maintained her innocence. The prosecution theorized that Cananda's death was unintentional and that her mother had panicked and attempted to conceal the crime. However, the mother of one's defense said that McCullough had always maintained that she was not guilty and that the state has no evidence to the contrary. Despite this, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. McCullough was convicted of all charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Reportedly, she burst into tears and clutched a Bible upon hearing this verdict, and her family appeared to be visibly upset by the news. McCullough's father, the one who'd reported his granddaughter's abuse to the police, believes his daughter is innocent. In the years since, McCullough has never told investigators what happened or where Kynane's body is. Kynane's was described as a bright and well-mannered young girl who could read simple words and count to 30. She was a fan of SpongeBob SquarePants. Investigators suspect that her father was involved in her disappearance, and they have stated that they will pursue charges if new evidence emerges. Natasha McCullough is scheduled for release from prison in 2023. Cananda's case marked the first time in South Carolina history that a trial for a child's murder was held without the discovery of a body. Moving on to the next case. Kieran and Ornith Murphy. Kieran and Ornith Murphy were an Irish couple who relocated to the United States in the 1960s. Kieran worked as an actuary for San Francisco's Employee Retirement System office, while Ornith was an expert solo sailor. Ornith was well known in the sailing community and occasionally sailing magazines. She owned a 1980 39-foot fiberglass auxiliary sailboat named Sola 3. The vessel featured dark blue circular emblems with a gray swirl painted on both sides, making it easily recognizable. The couple lived in San Francisco and had 2 sons, David and Patrick. Kieran did not know how to sail, and being on the water made him seasick, but he did help with the maintenance of the boat. They had amassed a small fortune through real estate speculation. 4 years, Kieran and Ornith lived a happy life, but in 2001 their marriage started to fall apart due to Kieran having an affair. The couple were in the midst of getting a divorce later in the year. Along with the potential divorce, the Murphys were also facing a potentially costly lawsuit stemming from a 1999 fire at one of their apartment complexes, which severely burned a 2-year-old girl. At the time, Kieran was living in an apartment in Nob Hill and Ornith had moved in with her niece in Oakland. Her boat was docked at the Oakland Marina in the Jack London Square area of the city. On December 15, 2001, both Kieran and Ornith would vanish along with Ornith's sailboat. Kieran was last seen at a Christmas office party on December 14th. Kieran has never been heard from again. His friends and family became concerned when he failed to report for work on December 17th, and they filed a missing persons report. It was at this point that they realized that Ornith was also missing. Ornith was last seen in Oakland on December 16th, the day after Kieran had gone missing. The sailboat disappeared on the same day as Ornith and has never been located. It was found that Kieran and Ornith had planned to meet on December 15th to discuss legal issues. Ornith was seen working on her boat that afternoon. A witness reported seeing a man on board who was similar in appearance to Kieran. However, it was never established if he really was Kieran. Witnesses also reported hearing a loud noise coming from the boat in the evening. They described it as a banging noise. However, they weren't sure if the sounds were of gunshots. The boat was captured on video surveillance pulling out of the Oakland Marina at 8:36 p.m. that night. The boat was not equipped for long-distance sailing. It had about 1 week's worth of food on it when it disappeared, but no safety or foul weather gear. The next morning, Ornith called her niece from the boat and said she was in the marina in Berkeley. Her niece invited her to breakfast, but Ornith declined the invitation. No one ever heard from Kieran or Ornith again. Kieran's friends say that Kieran was planning on a trip to Mexico after Christmas. The couple's sons say it would be uncharacteristic of them to leave without warning. One theory surrounding the disappearance of Kieran and Ornith Murphy suggests that Ornith shot Kieran and then took her own life shortly afterward. However, there is no concrete evidence to support this theory. Despite the speculation, neither of the couple's credit cards nor their bank accounts have been accessed since their disappearances. Now, 18 years later, the Murphys remain missing, with no definitive answers about what happened to them during that time. Moving on to the next case. Maritza Gleamed Grimmett. In April 1983, children discovered the skeletal remains of an unidentified individual in a culvert in what is now Lake Forest, California. Responding to the scene near Old Trabuco and Canada roads, an excavation was conducted to recover more remains. Upon examination, it was determined that the remains belonged to a female who was likely black or of mixed race. She was estimated to be between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 6 inches tall, and between the ages of 18 and 24. Jane Doe was also noted to have a distinctive gold tooth. It was determined that the woman had been the victim of a homicide. In August 2010, the details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. Over the years, multiple forensic renderings of the woman were released in hopes of generating new leads. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement to identify her, no matches were found, and the case eventually went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the Orange County Sheriff's Department submitted forensic evidence to OthRAM, hoping that advanced DNA testing could help to finally identify the woman. OthRAM scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to the FBI's forensic genetic genealogy team, and the FBI team performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. Using these new leads, investigators contacted a distant genetic relative of the victim, who suggested Jane Doe's forensic renderings be posted to a Facebook group for Jane Does and missing women from the 1970s-1980s. Approximately 1 month after the posting, a woman contacted investigators and said she believed the Lake Forest Jane Doe could be her missing mother. Lake Forest Jane Doe is now known to be Maritza Glean Grimmett, a Panamanian native, married a U.S. Marine in the summer of 1978, and gave birth to a daughter. In late 1978, the family moved to the U.S. The family resided in Columbus, Ohio, and Millington, Tennessee in late 1978 through mid-1979. In July 1979, the couple was going through a divorce. Maritza told her sister she was going to California. Her family never heard from her again since. She was 20 years old at the time of her disappearance. Investigators are actively investigating Maritza's slaying. Anyone with information on this case is asked to contact Investigator Bob Taft at 714-647-7045 or coldcase@oaksheriff.gov. Anonymous tips may be submitted to OC Crime Stoppers at 855-847-6227 or at occrimestoppers.org. Moving on to the next case. Derek Michael Mason. In January 1992, the remains of an unidentified individual were found alongside the Pennsylvania Turnpike in Clay Township, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania State Police responded to the scene and determined that the remains belonged to a male, estimated to be 5 feet 10 inches tall and between 18 and 30 years old. The cause of death was believed to be homicide. At the time of his discovery, the man was wearing a light blue long-sleeve sweater from Kate Collins and a size 36 pair of men's Fruit of the Loom jockey-style underwear. The man also had a scar on his chest from a previous bullet wound that had healed. In April 2017, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the man, no matches were found. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the Pennsylvania State Police submitted forensic evidence to Othram. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to a PSP analyst, who performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads that led investigators to potential relatives of the man. This investigation led to the positive identification of the man, who is now known to be Derek Michael Mason. Derek was last seen leaving his home in the 500 block of South 39th Street in West Philadelphia in October 1991. Derek was known in the area by the names Hawkeye and Hawk. He was never reported missing. Anyone with information regarding the slaying of Derek Mason is asked to contact Trooper Brian McNally, PSP Lancaster, at 717-290-1967. PSP Tips is offering a $2,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in this case. Moving on to the next case. Lynn Scholes. Lynn Scholes, a 17-year-old freshman at Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont, was looking forward to her final exams in December 1971. She had studied diligently for her English drama exam scheduled for 1 p.m. on December 10th. At 12:55 p.m., Lynn left her dormitory with her friends to head to the exam. However, on the way there, she realized she had forgotten her lucky pen and told her friends she was going back to retrieve it from her room. That would be the last time Lynn was seen by her friends. She never returned to take her exam, and when they went to her dorm room, she was nowhere to be found. Although her friends initially thought it was strange, they waited for 2 days before reporting her as missing. A week later, her parents were informed of her disappearance. Lynn's personal belongings, including her checkbook, identification, and wallet, were left behind in her dorm room. During the police investigation, they found that on the day Lynn went missing, she was seen outside of a health food store called All the Good Things, eating prunes, just prior to meeting up with her friends to take the exam at around 12:30 p.m. During that time, she had reportedly mentioned to someone that she was going to be going to New York, but that the bus had already left. Lynn then returned to campus where she had that walk with her friends and reportedly claimed she left her pen back in her dorm room. Later that day, witnesses reported to have seen Lynn again, standing at the same bus stop where she was seen earlier around 2:15 p.m. This 2:15 p.m. confirmed sighting of her would be the last. Police at the time considered the possibility that Lynn had left of her own accord. Lynn had previously sent letters to her family stating she was homesick and was thinking of withdrawing from school. However, her friends and family said she was looking forward to going back to her home in Addison County, Vermont for the Christmas holidays, and they do not believe she would have run away. There were several sightings of Lynn in the days following her disappearance, but none of them were confirmed. The case would soon grow cold. Then in February 2015, a tip led investigators to link Robert Durst as suspect in Lynn's disappearance. Robert Durst was the owner of the All Good Things health food store, the same store that Lynn was last seen eating prunes in front of. Moreover, the store was across the street from the bus stop where Lynn was also seen. Robert Durst is the prime suspect in his wife Kathleen Durst's disappearance, and is also a suspect in the unsolved murder of Susan Berman. He was charged and acquitted for the murder of Morris Black in February 2003. He is also considered a possible suspect in several other murders and disappearances. And his complete troubling story is explored in HBO's documentary, The Jinx. Before the tip, investigators were unaware that Robert Durst had once owned the health food store, All Good Things. However, there is no solid evidence connecting him to Lynn's disappearance, and no new information has been released to the public. The case remains unsolved, and anyone with information about Lynn's whereabouts or what happened to her is urged to contact Detective Chris Bodish at 802-388-3191. Moving on to the next case.